Hey, good morning, church, and welcome to Sunday morning.
Good morning. Yes, good morning.
We are pretty excited about this morning. We love talking. I don't know if you guys know that about us. We love conversation. And so we decided with this series, we wanted to have some difficult conversations, but they're needed conversations.
Very much needed conversations, yes.
And so I want to address a few things just right up front. We do want this to be a conversation to the best of our ability using technology. So Patrick and I both have our cell phones up here. He's got his laptop open. If you guys have our cell numbers, if you want to put something on the Facebook feed, whatever the case may be, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have things you want to add on, because one of the things about these conversations is they're bigger than one Sunday. They're bigger than 100 Sundays. They're huge conversations, and so
huge.
We'd love to hear some of your input. Now, the other thing I want to address beforehand, we heard something this week that I think is interesting. So somebody made the comment that the three of us, so me, Patrick, and Will, we all agree on stuff, and so that then we don't necessarily get different viewpoints.
No. That's very, very strange to hear, to be honest, but
We've had some pretty heated conversations, and I know what ends up happening and what people are perceiving is when we come up here, we present a unified message. But behind the scenes, and you can ask Will, if Will is around, if you're sitting beside Will, you ask him. We have had some good arguments. We have had some huge, and to this day, there's things that we don't see the same way, but I think the way that the three of us do this, we model this whole idea of having conversations, and I think it's so necessary to have people in your life who have the courage and willingness to fully disagree with you.
Yeah, I think it's a very important thing, and I think living in a climate where it would seemingly be that people at disagreement, at least that's what's constantly portrayed in the public eye, is that it's where you disagree is where it gets highlighted. Like if you look at how people are so like on each side of spectrums, whether it's liberal or conservative, or whether it's you are on that side and you're not going to have a conversation, and it's my side and it's my way or the highway, and that's just the way it is, and it just seems like there's no real communication that takes place anymore, and we really believe in modeling, be honest about where you're at, say where you're at, talk about where you're at, and then find the places where common ground exists to be able to walk together in community, instead of it being so adversarial and opposition based where no, we disagree on this. Well, I don't believe that's being like Jesus at all.
No.
And I think you see that in his life, and I think what we desire is to model the way Jesus treated people. Yeah. And he always found ground to be able to connect with every person. Yeah. And I think that's what we want. And that may appear to some that, everything's the same, when really there's a lot of differences, and that's because that's the way God made us, and that's the way it should be.
And I think one of the things that has happened with our ability to have so much information is that we can find facts to back up what we believe.
Oh, yeah.
And so one of the things you see on Facebook now is if you're against masks, you post every article you can against masks. If you're pro-masks...
I'll pull one up right now.
Right. But that doesn't give you a good balanced viewpoint. Like, you can just go on the internet and prove anything you want to prove.
Oh, yeah.
That's not conversation. And I don't think we advance as a race. We don't advance as a country. You don't advance in any way, shape, and form when you're only informed by people who already agree with you. Because that's really putting yourself in a pretty arrogant... I'm this smart... that I know. No, come on.
When you look at the life of Jesus, when you look at the life of Paul was an extremely if we use the term, read individual.
Yep.
He would literally be able to walk into a society, and within the context of that society and the writings of that society, be able to communicate with people within that society based on what they've been reading. So he knew. He didn't exclude. He allowed that information to challenge his thought processes. He allowed that to be something, because once you start getting into your box of view and you don't allow your view to be challenged, that's a very dangerous place to be.
Yeah, no, 100%. And so that's a big part of our goal. And I mean, we've been saying this before COVID even, but the idea of having conversations, of having difficult conversations. And so we want to, over the next couple of weeks, as we're doing this, we're going to be having these conversations. And so I want to tell you where we're kind of going from here. So today we're going to be talking about death. Next week we're going to be talking about the judgment. The judgment is one of those, it's a pretty hot button topic, but we're going to talk about it. A week after, we're going to do conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
If they let us, you know what I'm saying, right?
If they let us. We've already had some feedback.
No, we want to have these conversations, and one of the things that we've done with this is we study it throughout the weeks leading up, but this isn't scripted. We want to have this conversation. That's why we really want you guys to be giving us feedback, you guys to be giving us Q&A, because we want to have this conversation. We don't know for sure on some of this stuff, but we want to at least model the fact that we need to have this conversation. And I think part of why COVID has hit us so incredibly hard is it's forced us to talk about things that we don't want to talk about and we refuse to talk about. What are the two guarantees in life?
Death and taxes.
Right, death and taxes. Now in Canada, we model it like this. We don't talk about death and we don't talk about taxes, which also explains why our tax rates are insane. If you live in Elmer, have you looked at your tax bill? Like, it's nuts. But we don't talk about that. We don't have those conversations, right? Because they cause us to argue with each other, and then people start bickering. But I think a part of that bickering process is what develops healthy communities. Like, you have to have different perspectives, and death is another one of these conversations that I don't want to have. You don't want to have. Mm-hmm. But COVID has kind of said, look, I don't care if you live in Canada. I don't care if you're wealthy. I don't care if you have the best health care in the world. If I choose to take you, you're taken. And I mean, we knew this before.
Yeah.
You can go out on the road and get in a car accident. You can have a heart attack. You stroke. I mean, there's endless ways you can die. But we don't have this conversation. And we really feel like with COVID, that's one of the things that's really driving people is the fact that they just haven't had this conversation. So this fear of death has become,
I think, very much amplified, I think, I mean, in a very reasonable way.
100%.
So not to put that aside and to say people are being unreasonable, but I mean, from a basic North American culture society point of view, and I think it would be fair to say, we really haven't had anything really challenge us. I mean, you would have to go all the way back to, I mean, the closest thing would be 9/11,
yep.
and then further back before that, I mean, there's something that's so globally and so all-encompassing and so can instill so much fear. You're talking like way back to maybe Cold War, but World War II, yep. You're going a long way back. I mean, generations back. So like, it really hasn't impacted us where we've had to kind of face down like fear and death in such a way that we actually look at it, the reality of how this could really affect us and our family and our future. So I think there's the other side of it where, where people are honestly haven't been challenged this way with their own mortality. And I think that's a fair thing to look at and say, all right, so let's talk about it.
Yep, absolutely. So last week we started, if you guys remember the series we were kind of going through, is we're trying to figure out how to thrive even when it hits the fan.
When it hits the fan.
Right, and it really did. And I think in the Elmer area at least, there's a lot, and I mean, there's still people who believe that this COVID thing is made up, right? But all of a sudden it really began to hit, and people were forced to go, okay, this is real, and people have responded, and I'm hoping that the message has kind of gotten through to everybody that there's a reason we're asking you to socially distance. There's a reason that you're asked to wear masks in certain places, and this COVID thing is real, and it can impact families, and it can spread through our communities. And so we really felt like, now that it's hit the fan, let's have these conversations. We closed the church. We felt that was the safest thing to do. So we talked last week about as soon as you come through a moment of crisis, what really matters to you becomes very, very evident.
Yeah, we talked about discovering where our treasures are. Mm-hmm. And really the way that we figure out where our treasures are is where our focus and attention lies. Yeah. And this is one of those moments where we mentioned last week, one of the themes was that lemon getting squeezed. And when you squeeze that lemon, you figure out really what's on the inside. Yep. And really in many different ways, and although you can look at this from so many different perspectives, but many people are feeling like their life is getting squeezed. And it's really been revealing. And I think we should embrace the opportunity to really feel what that squeeze has done for us and be able to say, okay, where has my attention really been? Has it been on the right things? Has it been on family, or has it been on finances, or has it been on my future? Where has it been? Has it been on Christ? Has my affections been where they should be? And this has been a great opportunity for us to actually have that conversation. And I feel like, again, coming back to COVID and the idea that it's causing death, and being able to actually look at it straight in the eye and have a conversation with your spouse, have a conversation. I mean, we even talked about, having, you shared a little bit about having conversations, for me, I asked you this question a little bit earlier, what was your first real moment where the idea of death became real to you? Like, where was that for you in your life? Do you remember the time, like, where you like, okay, death, Like, what happened to that person? What really? Do you remember when that was in your life? When that first touched you? Like, I've been thinking about all sorts of these things this past week. But for you, where did death first impact you?
I think that the first experience that I remember offhand, and maybe it isn't the first, but it was the one that definitely impacted me the most up front, was when friends of mine lost their dad. And he passed away in a trucking accident. And I remember being a young kid, and you're trying to process it, right? Like, it's when I look back now, there's so much that I didn't grasp. I understood the sadness, but I'd never gone through it. And you're a kid, right? But it was very sudden. It was very unexpected. In watching the pain of that, it was a bit eye-opening. Yeah. I think, though, that for me, what has been most insightful is now watching my kids experience this the first time. Because as a kid, I felt like, and maybe it was just me, maybe my development was just a bit slower and I didn't get things. But it didn't all click in, right? Like it took a couple of years for some of that reality to really click in. But now watching my kids, I remember when Grandma died, or my Uncle Neil died, or Uncle Henry, and watching them start wrestling with the fact that there's a chance that Nana and Papa could die. There's a chance Grandma and Grandpa could die, and seeing their brains begin to process that, and have some really, really hard conversations. But most of the time, those conversations are incredibly good. These are not bad conversations. They're difficult, but they're good because they're real. You have to have this conversation. But yeah, for me, it would have been that accident. I still think about that often when I see the family and the impact that had on them. Losing your dad at a young age is incredibly hard, and so. But that would have been mine. What about you?
For me, I think the first real exposure to, and again, we talk about things clicking in. There are lots of people that would be watching right now that are like, we're still wondering when things are going to click in. But yeah, thanks, Ann. So anyway, I think for me it was my Oma. So my dad's mom. I just remember traveling up and down Highway 3 with my mom in we had a Cordova, big boat of a car. I just remember traveling from St. Thomas to the Tilsonburg Hospital with my mom, visiting her. It felt like daily. There was quite a bit. And then all of a sudden she was gone. And I just remember, I remember not going to the hospital anymore. And then I remember going to the cemetery out here on 73, where she was laid to rest. And my recollection, I don't remember why we were there. I couldn't really figure it out. It never really made sense. I just remember my brother being really sad and crying. Yeah. And I was just kind of like the oblivious, 4-year-old, and not really knowing. And he was, 7, and he knew that he had lost someone who meant something. And I just vividly remember his pain. And that was probably my first real, I remember that. I can, like right now, I can be in the car pulling away from the cemetery and watching my brother cry and not really understanding why. But that was probably my first real exposure to death. Obviously, even now, starting to wonder about, my kids and how they're, as a parent, you're like, well, do we hide our kids from death? Should we take them to the viewing so they see a person who's passed away laying in front of them and have to have that? Like, what do you do to do that? Like,
and that was one of our conversations that we had with our kids, because when Grandma, I think it was Grandma Thiessen's funeral, when she passed away and we went up, we felt like they should see that, but to them it was so shocking because they thought the person was in heaven, but the body is still here. And I remember coming out of the viewing going, I hadn't ever factored that in from a kid's standpoint, right? And so having these conversations even with kids. All right, hey. So all those jokes we made about talking about conspiracy theories and them shutting us down.
Apparently somebody was listening.
So we had a full power failure here. It just fully flickered and went back on, but that kind of kills it.
Gone. I'm hoping for people to be able to connect here in the next few minutes to reconnect.
So
yeah.
We're going to kill a little bit of time here as we allow people to jump back on. Any jokes? Anything you can tell us?
I don't know. That was one of those moments where you're just like, okay, that was not expected, and then that was just a complete. Somebody flicked the switch off and back on. Yeah. So there's something about going back live that is just so live, and wasn't expecting that. Everybody should have seen Trevor's face in the back.
It was
Arms
good.
went
Even
up
behind
in
a
the
mask.
air.
Even behind a mask, we saw the tears.
Yeah, we could see it. He was just like, no.
Right.
No.
Have you heard joke about the 3 pastors that walk into a bar?
No.
Me neither. I got nothing.
All right. Well, I think people are reconnecting here. That's fantastic. Welcome back. If you were disconnected due to our massive power outage here in Mount Salem, we're hoping that doesn't happen again. But we were conversing about our first experiences with death, and I do believe you were talking about your kid's first exposure, dealing with a funeral, and then having to have those conversations about, well, why is the body still here?
Yeah.
And the person is gone.
Yeah. So you know what? The second part of that we were going to talk about was, I don't remember my first experience with death as much, but I do remember vividly the first time it entered my brain that we were eternal, that somehow there was something eternal. Because I remember being at home, I think I was at grade 5, and my sister came home from youth the one night. And so I overheard her talking to Mom about this idea of living forever.
Mm.
And that started, I bet you, I spent the next 10 years, I had to have the radio on every night to fall asleep, because when my brain started going on this thought of trying to understand that we could live forever, it literally made me sick, trying to understand this. And so I remember nights just going like, I don't know how to calm my brain, because I'm just going crazy here thinking about this and thinking about this. And I think this is kind of where that leads, is the reason we don't talk about death is because there's just so much unknown.
Yeah, like we really don't know. Like even when people, it seems like I think that's why people dive into so many different areas in scriptures or so many searches in the human condition, is because we really do understand the fact that we really don't know a lot. Whether as we've talked about before, whether it's about the creation story and we feel like, yeah, I got a good grasp of, no, you don't. No. You kind of have an idea of what God is describing to you, but this puts everybody on the same page. So it doesn't matter what faith you are. It doesn't matter whether you're atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, whatever. If I were to ask you the question, where did it begin? Yeah. Like, give me the moment. And then
you can't. And they say, well, is that the Big Bang? Okay, but in order for Big Bang to happen, there had to be things to it that existed to bang.
Yeah, like what caused it to go poof?
Right, like, and so I think this is where
some scientist somewhere is just going, it didn't poof, okay? It didn't poof. Sorry for that person. That's not really what I meant, but
I think this is part of the problem with this conversation, is that I think Christians, one of the things we've done poorly is that we've gone into this with a bit of arrogance, we have the answers. I don't know where God came from. When you let that go and you kind of go, okay, so here's what we know. We exist on this planet, somehow. At some point, this planet began to function, and human beings became a part of it. Mm-hmm. And I know I live here now, but that is the extent of my ability to be able to fully comprehend. Is there another world out there? Is there another this? Is it, like those are huge questions. How long did God exist before He started the earth? Was there an earth before?
Yeah.
What did God do before all this? Like, and those are huge questions. And so I think part of this conversation, if we actually have it honestly, is there's a lot of I don't knows and a lot of faith. Mm-hmm. The atheist has as much faith as the Christian when it comes to this.
Oh, yeah.
And I find it interesting. So when Scripture begins in Genesis, God doesn't even bother to try to explain.
No.
Like, He's just like, you're not going to get it. So in the beginning, I created everything. So let me give you this in one chapter. One short little...
One chapter.
Listen, I wanted there to be light, so I made light. Really, you can do that, right?
Have you ever thought about what that would mean?
Right. It's so incredibly complex. And I think God just kind of goes, look, you're not going to get it. And I don't know, when eternity happens, and we obviously believe there's an afterlife, will at some point God explain it to us and we go, others people say, well, God exists outside of time, and so when you're in eternity, it's not like you're going to be counting days. Well, what does that look like? How does that? And so I think there's so much unknown that we need to approach this with a level of humility to say, based on what I see, I'm going in this direction, but I want to be honest that there's a lot of things I don't know. And then when we go to the other side and we go, okay, well, after,
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things. I mean, I talked to you about seeing something that has been a common theme across my social media thread is, guys, the end is near. Stop posting that stuff. Like, for real.
Yeah.
It's like you're trying to say that you have a grasp of what God was actually talking about. And I know you're brilliant, and I know you've studied Revelation, but the reality is that you don't know. And the moment you say you do, you're conflicting with what Jesus said when he said, no man knows the day or the hour. So please stop. I know you're trying to get a grasp on your fear about the end, but please stop.
Right, because what it does is again, you assume something that you don't actually know. Well, there'll be rumors of wars, there'll be disease, there'll be all these things. But those all were occurring during World War I, during World War II, during the Cold. I mean, every war during the Dark Ages. I mean, you go back in history. So when we do that, and you're going way ahead to next week, so I'm going to rein you back in.
Bring me back.
Rein you back
Bring
in.
me back.
No, I'm going to talk about, so the Bible begins with Genesis, and Genesis just kind of says, you're not going to get this, but God created everything. And it ends with Revelation, which basically, again, says, you're not going to get this. Like, I know people try to explain it, and they try to say, well, I fully get it. No, there's no possible way you do, because it was intentionally written in a way that really gave us a ton of mystery. We are 2,000 years later, and we're still looking at this book going, I don't know if I fully get it. And I think that's part of the mystery of going, okay, you're human. If God exists, and he is who he claims he is, you're not going to get this. And so I think a lot of the questions we're asking are the wrong questions.
Yeah.
When it comes to death, when it comes to eternity, we're asking the wrong questions.
Again, it comes to that point in our conversation that we had last week about where our attention and focus
Absolutely.
lies, and how we can get so easily distracted with putting our focus and attention on things that actually impact the purpose that we're supposed to be having right now
Yep.
in our present living.
Yep.
And I think as we talk about how we can get caught up in these things, I think even talking about what should we I've been thinking about my own mortality when we've been talking about having a conversation of death, and I'm 15 years removed from being 60.
Yeah.
I started thinking about that. I'm like, whoa.
But you look great.
Yeah, thanks. Really appreciate that. A little degree of saltiness in there, but as Trevor would say, I have hair and I don't. He likes to mock me on that one. So for all you bald people out there, be on my side. But when we talk about the impact on purpose, how especially when it relates to why this conversation matters is when we start thinking about death, where do we go with our attention, and how does it impact our present living?
Yep.
And how does it make us do we get to the point where we're not able to move forward at all in our life because we're just so captivated by, well, my life could end? Or does it put meaning into our everyday so that people can actually see Christ in our lives or see our living and be able to say, okay, how is that being impactful to us? Or do we just get lost in something that's distracting us from where it could have meaning? And I think that's what you're speaking towards here as we have this conversation, is how does that change our purpose? Or
Well, and I think this goes to the question of why. Why does this conversation matter? Or why does it matter what you view after death? And the biggest thing that we can conclude is that it defines your purpose in so many levels. And so if we're living in such a way that, if we're just going to say, okay, there's no eternity, there's no nothing, like you live and then you die, well, that changes purpose. Then literally my whole life is just try to make the best of what I have, and then I die. But if there is something more, and this would be a challenge to Christians, like when we talk about death, we see it as a blimp, or a blip.
that's good.
A blip in the rate. Like it is this tiny little thing. Like when you think about the fact that eternity is before and after, we're this tiny little thing. Like this should really impact our lives. And so when you think about treasures, in so many ways, we should have had this conversation first, because what we believe about after death clarifies life.
Yeah.
Right? In so many ways, we don't do this, but we really should be living backwards. And I always tell my kids this, and you try to talk about the fact that what do you want to become, and then live towards that. If you want to have a good marriage, make decisions that will bring you into a place of a good marriage. Right? What is that end goal? So if I want to be financially stable, well, then start thinking about how you're spending your money. And I think part of the issue that happens with death and eternity is that a lot of us have not given this enough time to actually think about even why we believe what we believe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that goes in the Christian sense, and this is one thing that Christians are chastised for often, is the fact that we believe just because our parents believed. But I would argue that in Canada in general, because we don't have these conversations, that a lot of people don't actually know why they believe what they believe. Have you ever actually slowed down and actually had this conversation of going, okay, I'm going to look at the evidence. Why do Christians believe what they believe? Why do Muslims believe what they believe? Why do Buddhists believe what they believe? Why do agnostics? Why do, and actually begin to go, okay, well, I want to believe based on the evidence that's here in front of me. But if you don't have these conversations, you just kind of exist. And you, okay, well, my goal is to have a nice family. But is that it? Is that it? Like, when you think, and this is, I guess, my challenge, even before I fully gave my life to God, was the belief that I just wanted my life to mean something. Like, I don't want to just live and then die, because then it all seems so incredibly meaningless.
Yeah.
Right? And we've talked about Ecclesiastes as being part of this. So if you're new to Scripture, Ecclesiastes, it basically starts with everything is meaningless. And because the author's having this struggle of going, I'm trying to find purpose. And so I've tried to find it in wealth. I've tried to find it in drinking. I've tried to find it in partying. I've tried to find it in wisdom. And at the end, as soon as I've achieved that, then I started with purpose. Head coach Tony Dungy, head coach of Indianapolis Colts, talked about after he finally won. And he says for him, it was just like this amazing, won the Super Bowl, this amazing moment. But for some of his players, it was actually the worst day of their lives. Because everything they had lived towards, every piece of their purpose was now complete. And he talked about the depression that a lot of them went into, because now all of a sudden there was nothing left to live for. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think that this is really at the heart of this conversation of going, at the end of my 50, 70, 80 years, whatever that is, what was this all for? What did I work so hard for? What did I strive for? And so having that conversation, I think, is so essential in being able to enjoy your life, because we're going in this pandemic and you go, okay, well, if I die, I worked my whole life for a retirement, now I'm dead. Like, did I waste my whole life? Right? And so I really think having this conversation and really approaching, kind of going, well, there's a chance I could die tomorrow. Right? And this goes back to your whole end times thing. Jesus might come tomorrow. Mm-hmm. He might come in 1,000 years. We should live as if, for us followers of Jesus, we should live as if today could be the end times. Yeah. And that should inform the way you live, right?
Yeah, it should definitely give us a perspective that the decisions we're making matter, that it's just not an empty day.
Yes.
You're like, have I invested in my day what I needed to invest to make sure that, let's say I step into eternity and I think about those days, I don't have, and I know, again, we don't know what death is going to be like in a very practical way. I mean, we have some pictures that are given to us and some ideas, but like, am I going to look back and go, man, I regretted not having enough purpose in my life? Like, man, I wish I would have taught my kids this one lesson, or man, I wish I would have set up, I think about a husband. Is the house in enough of an order that, if I were not to be present tomorrow, would Juanita be okay? Would things be enough for her that, she wouldn't need to like have to worry about certain things? Like, I think about that kind of stuff. Like, how am I living my days? Is that captivating my worry so that I'm not taking care of my neighbors, I'm not taking care of the people around me? Or is it putting life into my present so that I'm actually like, it has meaning? Yeah. So it's not just empty. And I think that's an important, like what you were saying, how it informs our now. This kind of reminds me a little bit of a story I once heard about a missionary couple, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead.
No, that was a beautiful transition. Yeah. It was wonderful.
Yeah. So the story I heard is they were serving. They wanted to serve in the jungles of the Congo in Africa, and they made it to the shores. I mean, the whole story of how they got there is incredible to begin with. But they made it to the Congo, and they determined that they wanted to go into the jungles and reach to the people that are unreached and the ones that have not heard the gospel. And a lot of people have, like, you've heard the romanticized stories of taking the gospel into the jungles. And in many ways, the gospel reached villages because of the people that went before them. But they were there and they were ministering and they were sharing the good news of Christ and salvation and redemption. They were doing all the things that you would think would be needed for these people to grasp a hold of. Man, they need Jesus. They need this God. They need this God of life. They need this, and they just saw no conversions were happening, and it was like they didn't know what was taking place. Like, what more did they need to show them in how they lived their life? And then the mother of the family contracted, I believe it was black fever. I think I don't. Basically, you end up bleeding out, and they were so far in the jungle. There was nothing they could do to get her to medical help. Whether or not getting her to medical help at that time would have done anything to change the outcome. So they ended up as a family, basically within a matter of a few days, watching their mother pass away in the presence of the native people watching. And then they basically buried their mother in a hollowed out log. And they watched how this family, this Christian missionary family, handled death. And how the way that they handled death was, there was tears, but it was celebration. It was singing. It was laughter. It was together. It was hugging. It was like this. It was different. And I think it was a few days after the funeral that the leaders, the elders of the village, approached the father and said, "We want to have this God that you serve." And he was completely taken back. Like, of all the things that they have done and ministered and worked for and served them and cared for them and loved on them and helped them and do so many different things, he after, he shared with them the gospel, and they, whatever terminology you like, after they received Christ and the new birth, whatever, he asked one of them, he said, "What happened? What changed? What now changed that now you want Jesus? Now you want Jehovah God?" And the native villager basically said, "We knew that your God was good for living. But when your wife died, we now knew that your God was good for dying." And it dramatically altered how they viewed the faith experience, to understand that, like, to them, death was. And here's a native people who had no exposure to any sort of, like, you could quote unquote Western thinking and philosophy and everything, but they believed death was a horrible, like, just cataclysmically awful experience, and they would writhe in agony. It was a terrible thing, and they believed in all sorts of spiritual, like, darkness that was wrapped around it, and they had no exposure to any teaching at all, but this is what they, in their human condition, believed. But then watching this family go through what death was to them, they saw that there was a difference, because they were living for a purpose that was beyond living, that the death didn't stop relationship. It didn't stop. It changed it. And there was something more. And it profoundly altered. And from there, revival, and it spread like wildfire through the villages and through the communities, where they saw, I think it was upwards of 30 churches planted on the river, and just an incredible revival breakout in the native community, because Jehovah God was good for dying. And I think when I examine how I'm living, is my Christian experience projecting to the people around me that it's good for dying? And is there a difference? Am I able to self-examine myself enough to say, is my life different enough that people can see that, even though, we say things like the accumulation of wealth isn't a bad thing, and it's not. But can people see a difference in how I live? And can people see a difference in how I handle death? Because I believe those moments when we scrape away everything else, that these moments matter to how people view our faith experience, and it mattered to them.
And I think, there's different perspectives on life, and I think when you think about eternity and you think, okay, well, my goal here is to bring as much life and love to others. And then my reward is eternal. That shifts everything. And I think part of our struggle in Canada is that because we have everything, people have this idea that I need to get the most out of this life before I die. Whereas Jesus would have said, well, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And your life is God. And God is going to give you this incredible life. But while you're here, this is the place to share that life, because not everybody has what you have. Not everybody has that hope that you have. Not everybody has that joy that you have. And I think that's where that conversation about treasure again comes full circle, because you end up, if your treasure is God, and your treasure is pursuing after His life and His way and His truth, you are directly forced to go love on other people. That's what He's always going to do. And I know for us as a church and us as individuals, we both of us have felt quite inspired this week to really push to whatever's next with our Family Central Apartments project, because the need is becoming incredibly great. Mm-hmm. But this is the role of Christianity. And so if it costs me so that we can avoid sending people into poverty and sending people into homelessness, that should be something that we want to do, but it's all perspective. Because if this life is all there is, I'm not risking my kids' financial future to help somebody else. Sorry. Right? If this is all there is, I'm just not doing it.
I'm going to give them the best 70 years of their life or 80
100%.
years of their life that I can.
But if there's something greater, and I am convinced that together in eternity we will be serving and we will be loving life and enjoying, then if I have to sacrifice here so that there we can live, that's okay. But we have to get to that place. And I think part of the struggle of the Christian faith in a rich environment, remember Jesus said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich to inherit the kingdom. Yeah. Right? And you look at that and you go, but because the kingdom really is about sacrifice.
Yeah.
But not sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice with an eternal reward. So when you think about it this way, so my kids talk about sports, that's what my kids love. And so if you want to make the NHL, mm-hmm. it is going to require an insane amount of sacrifice mm-hmm. and determination and practice and work. The end goal isn't the practice. The end goal is achieving a goal. And with our lives, if we can look at eternity, okay, the end goal is to be able to stand before God the Father and Him look at you and go, well done. Like, you lived well. If that's the goal, then suddenly sacrifice doesn't hurt as much. Because if my sacrifice helps others live, I'm good with that. Because my reward is eternal. And I think that's much more the whole treasure conversation too. We get so lost in how much money should I donate? How much money can I keep? It's not that. It's what's your focus?
Yeah, I think just as you were speaking there, having the thought that, I think about my kids. Like, I bring this up constantly with my children because I'm hoping to prevent, by the time they become a teenager, that they think their bedroom is theirs. And trying to get them to understand that, like, everything they have has been shared with them. Like, everything. All their toys, all their clothes, everything that they have, it's been shared, it's been given. Yeah. People have sacrificed for them. And maybe also just thinking, we need to start understanding that our neighbors and the people around us are God the Father's children. And we have a responsibility to care for them as well, and to share with them as well. To take care of them as well, and to understand how God would like us to take care of them, and to act on what He leads us to. And I think that's something that we need to think about. We need to dive into. We need to be willing to examine how am I doing that for my community, and to find the right. We use the word, well, there needs to be a balance. I think there just needs to be what God wants you to do. And that's the right balance. But we need to actively pursue that, because it's very easy to get my attention off Like it is. You've had conversations with me. You have to be pretty quick to keep up with where I'm going, because one moment we're having this conversation, the next moment we're talking about anything that's just coming into my sight line. Yeah. So that can be a little, but talking about finding meaning and finding purpose and dealing with the dealing with the wealth and riches of our society. This is an honest conversation, but there was an individual in the Bible that also had to deal with this exact thing. He was someone that had wealth and had riches but he also was, inside of that, he demonstrated a wild quest for understanding purpose. And we see that in the life of Solomon. I mean, you spoke a little bit towards that. We talked a little bit about that earlier, and how he was, he tried everything. Yeah. And at the end of the day, he had to get to the place where he was like, okay, yes, there's so many things that I can experience and I can take in, but if my purpose doesn't have a filter that's God, then there is no meaning. Yeah. There is nothing. I don't want my life to be meaningless.
Well, and I think that's, and again, going back to kind of looking at this from an outsider's point of view and being a bit more philosophical on it, what is that inside of us that is so determined to find meaning? And you see this in people outside of faith. You see this in everybody. Everybody wants to have something to live for. And it all kind of points in a direction that goes, okay, well, there has to be something. And when you look at, again, when we look at the faith of not knowing where anything came from, but there has to be something. And I think this is the shame or the frustration with not being able to have these open conversations with people, to kind of go like, I'm not going to try to force any of my friends to become followers of Jesus. Anybody who knows me knows that I would never force that on anyone. But where I get frustrated is that our Canadian culture has developed this type of limit to being able to have conversations that are really meaningful. And then all of a sudden a death occurs. All of a sudden something painful hits. And then people are like, well, now let's have this conversation. And we could have had this years ago. And then we wouldn't be feeling some of this. We wouldn't be like... And I think the second part before we wrap up for this morning is the whole judgment piece. And we want to get into that. So the Christian faith and most religions, at the end, they talk about a judgment. And so we want to talk about that next week and talk a little bit about how we deal with that. What is God doing? What is the judgment? Why the judgment? Because I think that's where at least a lot of my friends who aren't of faith, that's one of the questions. So there was everybody I know, are they all in hell? Is that what this is? Because I don't want to go to heaven, right? And those are honest, real fears. Yeah. So I think that these are so tied in. I think today our biggest kind of take home would be you need to find a way to at least give yourself space to consider that there's more. Give yourself the space to say, well, I'm going to at least look into faith enough to know for sure that I'm good with what I'm believing. Because I think just aimlessly wandering, it doesn't line up with anything else we do. No one builds a house that way. No one builds a marriage that way. No one builds a career that way. You are intentional, and I think that would be my hope for anyone listening, is to take the time to actually slow down and go, okay, what do I actually believe? Because there's a lot of people who believe in a God, but then they don't want to have any faith. And it's okay, well, why? I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I'm just going to tell you, well, there's some things that don't line up there. But then again, there's also a lot of Christians who say that they believe, but the evidence says they don't. Yeah. And so I think this isn't just a message to people outside of the church. It's a message to us. It's a message to my kids. It's a message to me and you. It's a message to our staff to constantly be coming back to, what do I believe, and does my life line up with it? All right, that's a true definition of hypocrisy, is just believing something and your life not lining up with it. Mm-hmm. And so for us, at least, we believe that there's hope. And I believe that at the end of this life, that there's an eternal good future that God has planned. I don't know exactly what it is, but what I do know is that I'm loving what God did here. Yeah. So if whatever's there, Jesus, who came from heaven, or whatever that's going to be, he came here and he's like, you're going to want to come back. If he believed that, I'm going to go on faith and go, I want that as well. But then that also means that during a pandemic, I can't lose sight of Jesus and allow fear to take over. Whether that's through conspiracy theories, whether that's through fear of death, whatever that is, we remain laser focused on the goal, and the goal is Jesus. The goal is to follow his way of life, to follow love, to follow the way of hope. And I think that's where we have by far the most influence in the world right now. People are seeking somewhere to have hope. Yeah. And we have that. And so I think that was part of us wanting to have this conversation of going, well, we just need to have this conversation. This is kind of where we've landed. But I want to be able to have these open conversations within families and within people who disagree and go, well, how did you get to where you believe? And how does that answer the question of meaning? How does that answer the question of purpose? So I want to end, especially those of us who are followers of Jesus, Ecclesiastes is just such a great book. But at the end of it, the author, let me just pull this up here, in Ecclesiastes 12, he concludes the matter. And I think what he says is a good thing to close off here. He says, not only was the teacher wise, but he also imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. The words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails given to the shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. Of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body. Now that all has been heard. And for him, he had the means and the resources really to pursue everything. Because a lot of us assume that if we'd have a little more of this or a little more of that, then we'd be happy. Right? You do this before marriage, and then you do it before you have kids, and then you do it before you own a home, then you do it before that. And he pursued all that, and he says, here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commands, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. And in the end, he concludes, I don't know, is actually where most of his thing is. He goes, what I do know, though, is that if God exists, I'm going to fear him and keep his commands. If there is no God, then live as you will. If there is a God who has control of both your body here and eternal, then I think we would be foolish to not want to pursue after that. And then when we find out that God actually loves us and cares and is deeply invested in our lives, it makes it all the more joy. Because when you read that at first, you can kind of go, But then you kind of go, man, but he's so good. It's kind of like, I don't like obeying my father's rules, but I know my father loves me deeply. And so when my dad, even to this day, asks me to do something, I'm going to say yes. Because he's a good dad. And I think that's really, at the end of this, you kind of go, okay with it. We're never going to answer all these questions. We've asked far more questions today than we've answered. But the God that we believe exists based on the history of Scripture, based on our experience, based on the evidence that we see, is a God who is deeply caring and compassionate towards his people. So I don't know if we have time for Q&A this blip on this hydro outage. We shouldn't have mentioned conspiracy theories. I think that was our issue. You got anything that came up on yours? I know our feeds got completely disconnected. I know there's been a bunch of great comments I've been reading. So good to see you guys connecting and sharing some of this stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to transition. What we did last week and we're going to do this week again is, so we've recorded the Psalm series, and it is lined up perfectly with this. We didn't even mean for this to happen.
Yeah.
But part two, it looks at lament. And it looks at being able to be honest with God in I think this conversation of death and this conversation of dealing with COVID and living within this fear and this uncertainty. It lends to a lot of conversations with God that start out with, why are you allowing this to happen? Why are you allowing this to hit third world countries? Why are you, and being able to have that relationship with God that really leads into that, where God says, I'm willing to hear all your laments. I want to have this conversation with you. I want to allow you to be my child and to really share your frustrations and your fears and your doubts, and I'm not going to criticize you for them. And so that's what we're going to end with. So if you've seen it before, I would encourage you guys to watch them again. It's about 14 minutes, and then take the homework that's from there into your coming week. And then if there's questions in between, we've talked about doing a midweek thing. We'll see if we do a midweek follow-up on some of these conversations. But with that, guys, we are praying for you guys, especially those of you guys, again, I just want to let those of you in quarantine know, those of you guys who are in isolation, those of you guys who have tested positive, who are waiting on tests, you guys are in our prayers. Those of you guys who have been impacted financially, whether that's through your business, whether that's through loss of income, we're here. We want to come alongside you guys. If you guys know of somebody who's struggling with mental health, emotional health, physical health, we want to come alongside. And whether that's going to be through the church, whether that's going to be through Family Central Apartments and the ministry there, whatever that looks like, we want to be there. We want to be the hands and feet of Jesus really in a practical sense. And so if you guys know of somebody, please let us know. But either way, we are praying for you guys. Love you guys.
Yeah, if you could also remember, keep in prayer on a more global scale, the country of Lebanon, terrible disaster that happened there. So be in prayer for Beirut and the destruction that they faced. And also be in prayer for people that the faith-based community, whether it's the Muslim community or the Christian community in China, facing tremendous persecution right now. Be in prayer for them as well. There are lots of people who are struggling with a lot greater persecution than having to put a mask over their face or being asked to do some very simple things to help alleviate other people's fears. So let's remember to pray for each other. And before we go to the video, why don't we just bow in a quick word of prayer, and then we'll send you off to the video. Father God, just want to say thank you for your amazing grace, and thank you for being a God who not just instructs us and commands us to love, but demonstrated love. Thank you for putting within like our community so many great examples of mums and dads and grandmas and grandpas that love and show kindness to each other. And we want to say thank you for God just filling us up each and every day with a passion and desire to more, to show more love, to show more kindness. I want to pray for those that are facing hardships and difficulties that we in our present day don't really have to face. We want to pray for the people of Beirut and the destruction they faced, and pray for those that lost loved ones, and pray for those that are facing uncertain days ahead. Also want to pray for those that are facing persecution around the world for their faith and destruction of their families and the unknown. Think of those in China and other places around the world that are facing, Lord, some very difficult times. We ask that you would please be with them and give them peace, and that you would just empower their faith, God, with who you are. For our community here, God, as we face both our present living and the possibility of death and what it might mean to be separated from those who we love, and God, possibly, God, being separated from them because we might not see them in eternity. We just pray that you would speak into our lives and their lives as well, and God, that you would allow, Lord, our neighborhoods, our community, our friends, our family to just know you. And God, what a day it would be to be together with you, Lord, in the future and in heaven, in our tomorrows, God. So we want to say thank you. Thank you for today. Thank you for your love and grace. Thank you for being an awesome God. Thank you for all that you do for us, God. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen. Hope you all have a great day.